Okay, so we all like to think we've got this whole integrity thing figured out,
It
right?
seems pretty straightforward, doesn't it?
Yeah, until you get into it a little deeper. Like with this excerpt you sent over from that talk, integrity, a Christ-like attribute.
Oh, that one's really going to make you think.
It totally reframed things for me. It's not just about being a good person, is it?
Not even close. It goes way beyond that. This talk digs into how much integrity shapes everything, our actions, our relationships, even how we see ourselves.
And it starts off with a curveball Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane.
Interesting place to begin a discussion about integrity, right?
Right. I mean, we all know that story, the intense emotions, everything. But the thing is, the way this talk presents it, it points out that Jesus could have avoided the whole thing.
He had the power to opt out, to choose a different path.
Exactly. So why even bring that up in a talk about integrity? What do you think the connection is there?
Well, it shifts the focus, doesn't it? It's not just about what Jesus did in that moment. It's about the why behind it. He was utterly committed to something far greater than himself. He chose integrity, even when it meant unbelievable pain.
Wow, talk about setting a high bar. So it's about commitment, even when it's incredibly difficult.
And it's not just this vague idea of commitment either. The talk gets really specific. It breaks integrity down into these three dimensions, and they're all connected. Being true to God, true to others, and then, this is where it gets really interesting, true to our own divine identity.
Okay, hold on. That last one, divine identity. We're going to have to unpack that later because that's a whole other conversation.
Oh yeah, we're definitely coming back to that.
But for now, let's stick with this idea of integrity as more than just following the rules, which is another point this talk makes so well. They use the story of Daniel, the lion's den.
Classic story.
Total classic. But here's the thing, the way they use it here, it's not just about Daniel being a good guy,
Right. They point out how it wasn't just that Daniel was told not to pray to other gods, he was supposed to pray to their gods.
He could have just kept his head down, said his prayers in secret, no one would have been the wiser.
Yeah,
right?
he could have, but he didn't. He prayed openly, knowing the risks.
Exactly. So if it wasn't about just blindly following the rules, what was it about? What made him do that?
Well, the talk calls it being true to what we profess. Daniel's actions were a public declaration of his faith, even when it was dangerous.
He could have rationalized being discreet, but
But that wouldn't have been true to him, to his core beliefs.
that's a powerful distinction. It really makes you think most of us aren't facing literal lions. But those everyday pressures, those are the things that really test our integrity, aren't they? What comes to mind for you when you think about that?
Oh gosh, I mean, think about those little decisions we make all the time. At work, in our families, even online. It's easy to let things slide, to compromise when the stakes don't seem that high.
Right.
But that Daniel story,
Yeah.
it's like a challenge. Are we willing to actually stand up for what we believe in, even when it's hard? Even when it might cost us something?
Even when no one's watching.
Exactly.
It's like taking that idea of character is what you do when no one's watching and like supercharging it.
Right. It's about that inner strength.
And speaking of standing up for what we believe in, this is where the talk takes another interesting turn, I think. They start talking about how tough it can be to do that in a world where right and wrong seem to change all the time.
Ugh, don't even get me started. It's exhausting.
It really is. It's like trying to hit a moving target,
It's like the ground is constantly shifting under our feet.
Yes. And that's exactly how the talk puts it. The world tries to define integrity with all these rules that seem to change every 5 minutes.
Which makes figuring out how to live with integrity, well, more than a little complicated.
It really is. You're right. It's exhausting. Like, how can you even build a foundation for, living with integrity when the definition of integrity keeps changing?
Yeah, that's a recipe for disaster, right? It's like trying to build a house on shifting sand.
Yeah.
You're never going to feel stable.
Exactly. And the talk actually makes that comparison. It says it's like the world's trying to define integrity with these rules that change all the time. It's just wild.
It is. It's wild and it's incredibly frustrating. You're always off balance, always questioning whether you're on the right track or not.
So what's the solution? What are we supposed to build on if everything around us is like morally fluid?
Well, that's where that first dimension of integrity comes, in being true to God. And I don't necessarily mean that in a religious sense,
Okay, yeah, I get that.
It's more about aligning ourselves with those principles, those eternal principles that are always true. Honesty, fairness, compassion, things like that.
Yeah, okay. Like those core values that don't really change even if the world around us does.
Exactly. Those are the bedrock, the solid ground we can stand on when everything else feels shaky.
It's like tapping into something bigger than ourselves, something that can actually guide us when we're not sure which way to go.
Exactly. It's about grounding our sense of right and wrong in something unchanging, something with real weight to it.
Which actually makes me think about that other point in the talk about the difference between integrity and, just being nice.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Because those are not always the same thing, are they?
Not at all. And so often we confuse the two, right?
Right.
We think that being a good person means never rocking the boat, always going along with the crowd.
Yeah.
But true integrity sometimes demands a lot more than that.
It can actually mean doing the opposite, like taking a stand, having those difficult conversations.
Yes, even if it
Ah.
makes you unpopular, even if it ruffles some feathers.
It's about being honest, even when it's hard, which I think is a lot harder than it sounds.
Oh, for sure. It's so much easier to just smile and nod, right? Avoid the conflict. But, and this is important, that often means compromising our own integrity in the process.
So we end up betraying ourselves to keep the peace.
Exactly. And the thing is, that kind of inauthenticity, it never really sits right, does it?
No, it doesn't. And I think deep down we know it.
We do. And the people around us, they sense it too.
So it really all comes back to honesty, doesn't it? Being authentic.
It really does. Because that's where real trust comes from. Not from always saying the right thing or trying to please everyone, but from being genuine, from letting people see our hearts.
And trusting that even if they don't always agree with us, they'll at least respect us for standing up for what we believe in.
Exactly. And that right there, that's real integrity in action.
So we've talked about being true to God, being true to others. But now I think we've got to circle back to this whole true to our divine identity thing, because
It's a big one.
it is a big one. And I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, honestly. The talk uses the story of Korihor, right? The guy who spends his whole life denying God, even though, like, deep down he knows the truth. And I'm not sure I see the connection to divine identity.
Yeah, that's a really interesting example to use, isn't it?
It is, but why Korihor? What's that all about?
Well, I think the source is getting at something really profound here. It's this idea that at our core, we all have this capacity for goodness, for truth. It's like a spark of divinity that resides within each of us. But like Korihor, we can choose to ignore that spark. We can choose to live in a way that actually contradicts that inherent truth.
So it's like he's choosing to live a lie, basically. But I'm still trying to wrap my head around this whole divine identity thing.
Well, think about it this way. The source is saying that we all have this innate potential for good, for truth, for connection to something bigger than ourselves. It's like there's this spark of divinity within each of us, but we can choose to ignore it.
We can try to bury it.
Exactly, just like Korihor did. He chose to suppress that truth, even though he knew deep down it was there.
So integrity is about more than just our actions. It's about making sure our actions line up with that truth, with that divine spark.
That's exactly it. It's about becoming whole, congruent. It's about bridging that gap between who we are on the inside and how we show up in the world. And that's where the story of Joseph Smith fits in, right?
Oh, okay, yeah.
Because you've got Korihor denying his own divine nature, and then you've got Joseph Smith, this young man who has this incredible vision, this life-altering experience. And what does he do? He faces persecution, ridicule, doubt, but he never wavers.
Wow, that's true. He never backs down from what he knows.
He owns it. He declares with absolute conviction, I had seen a vision, I knew it, and I knew that God knew it, and I could not deny it.
Powerful. Talk about courage. That unwavering commitment to truth, even when it's hard, that's what makes him such a powerful example of integrity, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it shows how much strength comes from aligning ourselves with that truth, with our divine heritage. Because when we understand who we really are, children of God, with infinite worth and potential, it gives us the courage to face those Korihor moments in our own lives.
Because we all have them, right? Those moments where it'd be easier to just go along with the crowd, to stay silent, to take the easy way out.
All the time. It's human nature. But real integrity, it means choosing to live in alignment with that divine spark, even when it's hard, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it costs us something.
Because in those moments, the easy way isn't always the right way.
Exactly. And choosing the right way, that takes courage. It takes a willingness to be different, to stand out, to maybe even be a little bit disliked.
But ultimately, I think deep down, we all respect people who live with that kind of integrity.
We do, because it's inspiring. It makes us want to be better ourselves.
So it's not about being perfect, right? It's about striving.
It's about progress, not perfection. It's about that constant effort to align our actions with our values, our outer lives with our inner truth. It's about becoming the best versions of ourselves.
This conversation has really given me a lot to think about. Like, it's not enough to just know what's right. We actually have to do something with that knowledge, right?
That's where the rubber meets the road. It's in those everyday choices that we reveal our true character.
It's about those moments when we're tempted to cut corners, to tell that little white lie, to look the other way when something's not quite right. That's where integrity really comes into play, doesn't it?
It does, because it's easy to talk about integrity in theory, but living it out in our daily lives, that's the real challenge.
Right. And it's a challenge that's worth embracing, isn't it? Because ultimately, living with integrity brings a sense of peace, a sense of wholeness that nothing else can really replicate.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, on that note, I think we're about out of time. But before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. As you go about your day, your week, even just the next hour, think about those lion's dens you might be facing, those moments where your integrity is being tested. And remember, you don't have to face them alone. You have that divine spark within you, that source of strength and guidance. Tap into it, draw on it. Because living with integrity, it's not about being perfect, it's about being true. True to yourself, true to your values, and true to that divine spark that resides within you. This has been quite the deep dive. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.